Oop, and it is loading. Good to go.
I'm giving this a few seconds just to make sure people can join us. It's moments like these when I wish as a DJ that I had queued up some kind of interesting music, dramatic music to play, but maybe next time. So I've given it a few seconds. So hopefully now we're live streaming and people are starting to tune in. So welcome. Welcome to the Vermont Progressive Party Racial Justice Panel. I'm Representative Brian Cina from the Old North End, and I represent Chittenden 6-4 in the Vermont House of Representatives, which is a piece of the Old North End and most of the East End, and of Ward 1 of Burlington, Vermont. I use he, she, they pronouns. I've been a state representative for 4 years, and I'm looking forward to another 2-year term because myself and my district mate, Selena Colburn, don't have an opponent. So we most likely will be looking at another term. And I look forward to fighting for economic, environmental, and social justice for another 2 years in the Vermont House of Representatives. As an elected official endorsed by the Progressive Party, I agreed to support the platform of the Progressive Party. And the Vermont Progressive Party offers this platform to enhance participatory democracy, protect inalienable rights, steward a sustainable environment, and promote the general welfare of the residents of the state of Vermont. It is our hope that this platform will help continue the political revolution both in Vermont and across the nation. There are 3 pillars of the Progressive Party platform: social justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. And tonight we're going to be looking at the pillar of social justice. I'm quoting now from the platform: social justice. As progressives, we understand that every issue intersects, yet at the core is the underlying question of how we treat each other. We therefore and foremost believe in eliminating institutional racism against people of color currently in Vermont and all future Vermonters. And racial justice is listed first. Racial justice: we will proactively work to eliminate institutionalized racism in our workforce, government, and law enforcement, and personal racial bias in ourselves. So that's my quote from the platform. So I'd like to speak about that for just a minute. Why is racism embedded into all of the institutions and systems of our society? In order to understand the problems and inequities of today, we must take an honest look at the history, at our history. Our state and nation are governments that were founded on land that was stolen from indigenous people. And our economic system was built on the backs of enslaved people, of indentured servants, and low-wage workers. When Europeans invaded and colonized this continent, they not only brought with them diseases and invasive species, but also invasive philosophies and religions, which built systems of oppression that exist to this very day. And the social construction of race was used to divide the working class and poor people so that landowning elite could increase their power and their wealth. Despite the narrative that the American Revolution was a fight for freedom for all people, the Constitution of the state of Vermont and of the United States both allowed slavery to continue to be practiced. And over time, although slavery was abolished in some forms, it continued in others, such as convict leasing or forced prison labor. And discrimination against Americans of African descent became institutionalized through practices such as redlining, sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, unequal education, disparities in the criminal justice system, and in healthcare access and treatment. And white supremacy not only impacts Black and Indigenous people, but all people of color and immigrants as they have integrated into the society of the United States. So in the face of the efforts of the wealthy few to extract labor and resources from the majority of us, there has been a long history of resistance and social change. From the slave uprisings, the rebellions, the abolitionists who fought to help enslaved people escape to freedom and to change the law, the Civil War, the civil rights activists who have been fighting for every step that we have taken along the long road to justice up until today, where we see the Black Lives Matter movement, turning people out to the streets during a global pandemic to demand justice for the many Black people who've been executed by the police. Current events are the latest chapter in a long story. As technology has exposed the centuries-old practices of oppression of the police, whose very origins are intertwined with the protection of the property of the elite, even when that property included human beings. So we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors who have fought for freedom within, we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors who fought for freedom within a system that was rigged from the start against us. And in order to dismantle systems of oppression, it's not enough to say that we aren't racist. We must be anti-racist. We must acknowledge the ways that we are complicit in systems of oppression, and we must work hard every single day to change ourselves and to change the world. Racial justice must be embedded into everything that we do. And we must look for ways to dismantle oppression in every single part of every system. So how do we do this? In order to address trauma, we must acknowledge it. We must acknowledge what happened and put that trauma in its place and grow from it. So we need processes of truth and reconciliation as a society, at the very least, for both colonization and for the institution of slavery. And we must come to terms with what really happened, make amends, and promote healing from those traumas as a society. We must build a new economy. In fact, we must create a whole new way of life on this planet, one that honors and respects all people and our Mother Earth. And we must empower marginalized communities and center the voices and perspectives of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in the process of healing. We must prioritize representation and leadership by those who've been the most impacted. And on that note, I would like to thank our panelists for joining us this evening to discuss the issue of racial justice. I would like to now give each of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So first, we have Reier Erickson. Take it away, Reier.
Thank you, Brian, for moderating the event, and thank you to the Progressive Party of Vermont for hosting it. My name is Reier Erickson. I live in St. Albans City. I'm running for High Bailiff of Franklin County. I am originally from Minnesota. In fact, I lived in Minneapolis, just a few blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. And I moved to Vermont in 2012. I lived in Middlebury and Bristol, and then actually lived for 2 years in Liberia, West Africa, where my wife took a post as a USAID contractor. I'm a founding member of Neighbors for a Safer St. Albans here in the city. We work on social justice and equity issues, mainly up to this point surrounding police reform and getting police out of schools. I'm mainly interested in racial justice because as a Black Vermonter and a Black American, I've seen our country go back, surprisingly enough, to a place that I am now more fearful than I was before. And I think it's important for us to address these issues and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Reier. So next up, we're going to hear from Ashley Laporte.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Laporte. I live in the South End in Burlington with my partner, Luis, and my dog, Otis. And I'm running for Justice of the Peace in Burlington. I grew up in Vermont, actually. I grew up in Stowe, Vermont with my sister, Jessica Laporte, and our mom, Chris Laporte. Jessica and I are Haitian, French, Canadian Americans, and we were raised by our white French Canadian mother alongside her 9 siblings who grew up in Stowe and our dozens of cousins who we consider to be siblings. we had an amazing childhood that was surrounded in a lot of love from our big family. But we were also some of the only Black people and people of color in our community. We went to a mostly white school. We grew up in an all white family. Our coaches were white. The majority of our peers were white. Everyone around us looked different from us. And that experience made us feel invisible. And the comments that came from the leaders in our community and the people that we looked up to that told us that Black people don't live in Vermont, there aren't BIPOC people in Vermont, erased our very existence. And that manifested in me in a way that led to me completely denying my Haitian heritage and my Black heritage. And I spent a really long time trying hard to push those things down and not be a part of my life. Mostly because, especially when I was young, but up into my adulthood, anytime I would talk about those things, I was met with a sea of white faces and not a Black or BIPOC face in the crowd to answer the many questions that I had about what it meant to be a BIPOC femme, what it meant to be a Black woman. And so, you know, I have come to racial justice pretty recently. I'm a proud member of the Racial Justice Alliance. I'm proud to have been a part of the Battery Park protests. And I'm really excited to run for Justice of the Peace because as somebody who felt invisible and erased most of my life, I think representation matters. And I'm excited to represent more people in the state, particularly young Black femmes who feel like they don't have people to look up to. And so, yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ashley. So next up, we're going to have Mark Hughes.
Thanks, Brian. And thank you to the Progressive Party for putting this on tonight. And I just want to shout out to this dynamite panel. We were all chatting before we came on. And I'm so excited to have the opportunity to meet you, Taylor, and you, Reier, and to cultivate some relationships. Of course, Kiah and Ashley, I can't say enough about the both of you folks. So just being on with you is amazing. I'm an Iowa native. Back at you, Kiah. I'm an Iowa native and I've been in Vermont for about 11 years. I was raised the fifth of five boys of a single mother in Iowa, first generation Yankee. She's from Lexington, or Livingston rather, Mississippi. My father's from Kentucky, so first generation Yankee, retired Army, kind of a cyber geek for a while, and became aware of a huge awakening in 2014 when I saw Michael Brown laying in the street for a while. And that's what convinced me that I needed to do something different with my life. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I'm the executive director of Justice for All and the coordinator of the Racial Justice Alliance. I've lived in central Vermont for the vast majority of the time I've been in Vermont. Montpelier, Woodbury, I've lived in Cabot as well as Williamstown, and I'm in Burlington now. I'm running for Justice of the Peace. I really enjoy the work that we do. It's very hard work. It is very fulfilling work. I'm proud to be associated with the Progressive Party. I wore my Richard Kim shirt today to kind of show off a little bit. My father-in-law, who will be 88 on Monday, and is an anchor of Black folks in this party. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here, and I appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of this fantastic panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So next up, we have Taylor Small.
Thank you so much, Brian. And echoing exactly what Mark said, what a phenomenal panel to be a part of this evening. These are some powerhouse change makers, so I am humbled to be amongst this crew. So my name is Taylor Small, and I'm running for state representative in Chittenden 6-7, which is all of Winooski and what I am trying to brand as the river sliver of Burlington because of districting, and we can get into that conversation a whole other time. But in thinking about my work in racial justice, I have to acknowledge the fact that growing up, I didn't truly understand what oppression looked like because my whiteness had protected me for a majority of my life. And the only time that I started to understand oppression was actually in middle school when my gender presentation was very feminine. And so at that time, I received extreme harassment in what was homophobic at the time because they made this assumption that based on my feminine presentation, that I was gay. And so that was used against me in slurs, that was used against me in physical assaults against my body, to a point that I didn't feel safe living in Western Massachusetts, and made my way up here to Vermont, where I started to go to high school. And again, I sat in this identity of being a queer person, a young queer person in Vermont, but still had that protection present where I had the opportunity to speak up and state my truth and not have significant pushback against me. And it wasn't until I was able to come out as a trans woman that it really illuminated for me how horrendous people can be and how horrendous our communities can be and how far my whiteness can protect me. Because it was only up until that point that I started to receive harassment again from grown adults in the street. I found it from not being able to find employment here in the state of Vermont, and having myself be unemployed for 6 months and not knowing what to do in that time, and fighting those overwhelming feelings of hopelessness, and knowing that the only way that I was going to be able to thrive is through community. And so it was through that community work and activism that, honestly, in my head right now, I have Rajni Edens screaming at the top of his lungs saying, "My liberation is tied with yours." Because that is what got me into this work, is recognizing that I am not fighting for myself, but I'm fighting for a future where justice is actually real, instead of these band-aids that we're given and told that it's justice or told that it's equity. So I'm really excited to be set to run and hopefully represent Winooski here, one of our most diverse cities in the state of Vermont, come January. And again, really grateful to be on this panel with you all tonight.
Thank you, Taylor. So last but certainly not least, our next panelist is Kiah Morris.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. Thank you for this incredible panel. I am excited and exhilarated to be able to share this space with you all, but I do have to admit the honesty of the exhaustion that I actually feel. I think it's important for us to acknowledge how challenging this particular moment in history is for so many of us, and the extractiveness that's required for us to keep this fight up, right? So I come to you as a Black woman who is living here in Vermont, going on more than a decade in this state, had the opportunity to reach heights that I didn't ever see myself in, having a voice that I never knew that I was going to be able to amplify, and an ability to pull others into movement work so that we can get busy, so that what we're able to do is to not have to have as many panels that are talking about racism and talking about representation, because we're trying to change the game from it being representation by proxy to direct representation from impacted communities that are often left out of our governmental systems. So I had the opportunity to be able to be the second African-American woman ever elected to Vermont State Legislature in its history. And there was over a 30-year time span between that of the very first. And so I still stand on the shoulders of Representative Bright and the amazing work that she did in South Burlington to break through and try to create space for others. But we have not continued that momentum. That moment was a moment and then it was gone. And so what happens when we find ourselves stepping into these spaces and challenging these bodies of power is that the systems of oppression and of white supremacy, they respond in kind. There is an equal and opposite reaction to our resistance, to our joy, to our survival. There is always an equal energy on the other side. So how do we keep the imbalance from destroying ourselves and destroying our spirit, right? So I was in this incredible space of privilege in its own way. it's both a privilege, but it's also a birthright. So it's less of like, oh, thanks for the honor, rather than I was supposed to be there to begin with. I should have been in that space from the start. But being in that space allowed for me to step in unapologetically and speak truths, to challenge folks, and for me to grow into recognizing that these systems are both broken and absolutely working to perfection, but finding those points and those people that are going to be necessary in order to move things where they need to go. And that the louder and the bolder that we speak, the more change we're actually able to make. And so even though it's uncomfortable for others to hear, even though it's exhausting for us to step into this space, for each of these people to put themselves on the line to try to make our democracy work in a way that is meaningful, we do so. But we're going to need more folks, right? So what happens is that system came through and we saw white supremacy coming out in all of its bold audacity and lethality and try to enact itself onto my life and my body. And I was but one of many across the state, but only difference between myself and my Black and brown brothers and sisters across the state is that I had prominence, that I had power, and that there was a promise for protection that the state was not going to be able to provide. There was a conversation around a dignity and a humanity, a human right to be, that was going to be called into direct question. And it made many across the globe take a moment of pause and say, if Kiah can't get protections, if Kiah can't get justice, if Kiah is unable to continue doing the work that she loves because we've set it up to pull her out, then what hope do the rest of us have? But instead of giving up the way we are here in Vermont, we found more folks, okay? And so the folks that are here on this panel came through and have all been there and been in this fight, and we're ready to continue it on. So I'm glad to be able to be here, a part of this conversation, and I can't wait to hear what other folks have to say too. So I'm going to pass it back to Brian so we can continue on with this great conversation.
Thank you, Kiah. So the first question we're going to ask, and we'll rotate through the panelists in the order we've established, is how have national events over the past year influenced public opinion on racial justice in Vermont? And how have the protests influenced changes in policy and law? Reier?
So I spent almost the last 2 years up until last March in West Africa, which was a very different experience. I came back to America. My wife and 2 kids were still stayed in Liberia for a couple more months and then got stuck due to COVID, but now they're back, thankfully. We bought a house when we were in Liberia in St. Albans. Our friends in Middlebury and Bristol and the surrounding area were warning us that it was not a great place. It was a place that had racial issues and had police issues. And having read it, I said, you know what, that's fine. Everywhere has those issues. And we bought the house and moved here. And it was right around the time that George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis that a group of citizens here came together and really started asking questions of the city surrounding the police brutality incidents that had happened here. And as we asked those questions, we found more and more members of the community who were concerned and afraid of what was happening. And that was really a flashpoint. And because of that, we were able to kind of group up and attack these issues and in a really substantial and meaningful way. And those friends that I've made and community members, I equate a lot to James Tyson. Now, if you're not familiar with James Tyson was the person who went with Bree Newsom in North Carolina to take the flag down, the Confederate flag down off that pole. Bree Newsom climbed that pole, started to detach that flag, and police came with tasers and were set to electrocute her basically with tasers on the pole. What James Tyson did was put his hand on that pole and say, I will keep my hand here, and if you electrocute them, if you electrocute Bree, you will electrocute me as well. And those were the kinds of things I found here. Not allies, but accomplices. And I think that's the way we can move forward in Vermont, not to bring it to the future, but presently, that's what I have here, and that's what we need more of, are accomplices and not just allies. Thank you.
Thanks, Reier. Ashley?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's a good question. And as I was thinking about how to answer it, it just brings me back to, as I was talking about my childhood here, and like the erasure of my very existence. During this most recent uprising around racial justice and movement of racial justice, I've been reminded that people think that there is not a problem here in Vermont. And I've been frankly appalled by leaders in our community and elected officials in our community who are publicly saying things on television such as, this is not Minneapolis. Vermont is not Minneapolis, right after George Floyd was murdered, and who are saying, why are we bringing a national crisis into the state of Vermont? As though the BIPOC folks who are experiencing racism have brought it here ourselves. You know, there is racism alive and well in Vermont and in our communities. And if you won't believe the BIPOC folks who are experiencing it, look at the data. The data tells us this. The most recent report released by Seguino at UVM showed that in Burlington, Black drivers are 67% more likely to be arrested during traffic stops than our white counterparts or any other racial group. We are also 3.8 times more likely to be searched than white drivers. And you can look beyond policing. I'm particularly disturbed as I think about having children who I want to raise in Vermont as I was raised, when I look at the school discipline data, where there is serious disparities between the experiences of students who are disabled and students of color compared to their able-bodied and white student counterparts. So racism is alive and well here, and BIPOC people live here, and we are trying to live fulfilled lives here. And what I have found is that while we are trying to have a national reckoning with our racist history as a country, and over 400 years of ongoing slavery and oppression, Vermont still continues to think that it's an exception. And I've been proud to be a part of local rallies and demonstrations and to connect with BIPOC folks in the area in these moments. And by connecting with people in my community, I remind myself, and I hope I can remind other BIPOC folks, that we belong here, that we are in fact Vermont too. And mostly, I hope that we can keep the momentum in fighting the powers that be. When you look at the racial justice resolution that was passed in Burlington, when you look at racism being declared as a public health crisis, and most recently, when you look at a violent officer in Jason Bellavance getting removed from the Burlington Police Department, we know none of those things would have happened, and they certainly would not have happened on the timeline that they did if it wasn't for the public pressure catalyzed by BIPOC folks, led alongside allies and anti-racist activists like my new friend, Taylor Small, and others who stand with us to put real pressure on elected officials. It seems like our elected officials and people who have power in this city and in the state like to say, it will take time. We cannot find the money to do those things. But what I have seen is that when BIPOC folks refuse to be invisible, refuse to let racism be swept under the rug, we can create the pressure that is required for people to act. So that's what I think has happened in this moment. It's given us the opportunity to come together, to fight for what's right, and to put the pressure on people who for too long have been saying that racism does not exist in our community.
Thank you, Ashley. Mark?
I think over the last year, I was just kind of dialing back through my head what happened. and not just over the recent months, but over the last year. And if you recall, I think we seated a racial equity executive director just a little bit over a year ago in the state. And that happened in the wake of a lot of work that was done, that we spent a lot of hours in what was then Kiah's Judiciary Committee kicking around to create this Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice System Advisory Panel, which opened our eyes to racial disparities across all systems of state government, which changed our lexicon from racism to systemic racism. And we started having these conversations about systemic racism, and we did indeed create that position. And I think that created the impetus for further conversations because I think people got curious. I think also during this time, over this last year, we've been able to advance other discussions across the state with a series of webinars we were doing, Hidden in Plain Sight, the truth about systemic racism across the state, teaching folks about root causes, not just the origins, but impacts and solutions surrounding systemic racism. Also, we were successful at getting the constitutional amendment through the second chamber of the legislature this past year, if you recall. And for the first time in history, we were looking on a wall in government operations at a bill called H-478, a reparations bill, the first one in history in Vermont. So there's a lot of stuff that were happening, and yeah, things seem to come to a screeching halt during COVID. But what COVID brought our attention to is that there are segmented communities and BIPOC communities, and there are indigenous Africans that come from lineage of slavery that were still being missed in this COVID relief, which prompted us to start checking in with the governor. And I think a lot of that led to the work that is happening here in Burlington. So I'm going to stop there. There's much more that could be said, but I will say that I cannot stop without saying his name. And his name is George Floyd.
Thank you, Mark. Taylor?
With all of the events that are happening, I think there is a power in the way that we are able to communicate now through technology for those who have the privilege to be able to access it in the first place. And thinking locally here in Vermont, and the fact that we do not even have statewide broadband for folks to be able to be connected to this information as it currently stands, to be connected to community, which we are all removed from at this time because we are trying to keep safe. But thinking about the power that has come out of this and what I almost see as a white awakening to the fact that we could talk about racism, and we could talk about racism in a historical context of what has happened instead of recognizing what is currently happening here in the United States and globally. And so what is so difficult is that it's taken so long, of course. And what is so radical is thinking about the power of our young people here in the US and thinking about the radical change that has been created by the tenacity of young, especially BIPOC folks here in Burlington in reigniting the demands that have existed already, and thinking the Racial Justice Alliance have put these demands forward and saying, these are the changes that we need. And by stepping up and seeing our youth step up and say, we are not taking this anymore, and we are getting our folks here. And we are asking specifically white folks to step in, step up, and protect us. Know that this work is yours, it is not ours. Your work is to protect our BIPOC community members, and know that it is the harm of our ancestors as white people that we are having to deal with. These are our problems that we need to be solving, and thinking that this harm did not start with slavery. This harm started, as Brian said, when we came and colonized this land that was not ours. My ancestors took this land and harmed it. And we talk about this foundation or institution of racism. And some folks describe it as being in the soil, and I would never say that reference, because racism is not in the soil, but is in the foundation of the building of these institutions that we've created. And so, though you're talking to someone who is now running in the political sphere and is looking to work within this institution that recognizes that there is systemic racism that we are able to talk about, while also recognizing, as Mark said, these bills are hanging on the wall. I heard this before and I was mind blown to think that there has been so much work put in recognizing that there is change that needs to happen, and it hangs on the wall.
Thank you, Taylor. Kiah?
Thank you, Brian. So, yeah, this year has been one heck of a year, right? It's really tested our nation. It's tested our state. It's tested our communities. It's tested our relationships with the people within our communities. So I think about the contrast of what's happened through the protests, through the actions, through people stepping into an awareness and a consciousness of the fact that racism is real. Just like science is real, racism is real. And there's a science behind racism, okay? I think about how it wasn't that long ago that we had high school students in Montpelier High School that were the first in the nation to raise the Black Lives Matter flag. And that was an enormous deal. First pre-K through 12 school in the entire country. They beat out Brooklyn, okay? So they were able to raise that flag, and those students did so, and it was powerful. But they did so in a culture of fear, and in one that was dangerous, inherently dangerous for them. And I think about how within that same year, I remember Representative Cina taking to the floor when we were reading the Black Lives Matter resolution, which this was an unprecedented year in that particular moment. We did not have the solidarity. We did not have the community. BIPOC folks were not in the building to do that celebration and to demand that audience in the ways that they had been in previous years. And as Representative Cina read the names of Blacks who'd been killed by police, white legislators got up and left the room. Today, we have towns all over Vermont painting Black Lives Matter on their streets. And it's both a point of celebration, but it is absolutely not a resting place. And that is where I feel like we're seeing this tension between what's happening on the streets and what needs to happen in the dining halls, at our kitchen tables, in our schoolrooms, in all of these places to try to shift away from racism ruling the day. And so what's happening, I think, in this moment is that we're getting a teeny bit of fatigue. I think that some of our white allies who were accomplices are stepping back into being allies and maybe being apathetic because they're feeling an exhaustion from the difficulty of doing this work. Yeah, it's hard, try living it, right? But this is what's worrisome, is that we're about to hit this point where we're going into an election that is inherently dangerous. And so our BIPOC communities are literally going to be on that other line of those considered to be enemies of those who want to uphold racism. So we have seen major changes that have happened through a whole suite of bills that took place in this year. There are so many more that never saw the light of day, as we've continued to say. So I am constantly in awe of the things that we're able to achieve, but I am tired as hell. And we need folks to stay the course and make sure that what we say happens in practicality into the real world and has actual direct impacts of support. I tried to time myself because we were worried about time. So supporting each other. I know, stop a Black woman from talking, right? So trying to support each other in actually actualizing the hopes, the dreams, and demands of those most impacted in this moment in time. So I'm going to invite you into that work, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment.
Thank you, Kiah. And I appreciate the metaphor of your timer going off, because like we all have to share it's like just a test, it's a symbol of the collective work we all have to do, and how every individual has a responsibility to do our own work and not just rely on someone else. And it was just an interesting thing when you were talking about needing help right now from others, and then the alarm went off. Because I'm tired right now, and it's nice for me as the moderator to have other people keeping in mind how hard it is to keep a discussion moving when everyone has such important things to say. So we're going to have a final sort of constellation of questions here that I'm going to ask, And the panelists are, I think we're going to go a little bit over our originally planned ended time, but the panelists will have about 4 minutes each to speak to these two questions as you see fit. So I will read these two questions now, and then we'll begin with Reier again and go through the rotation in the same order. So the second question, the first question, the first thing everyone spoke to was related to your past and what brought you to this work. The second question was about the moment that we are in. This third question is about the future. What should be our racial justice priorities in the upcoming year and legislative session? And how do you see yourself advancing social change and racial justice through your elected position or your job, Kiah? So once again, what should be our racial justice priorities in the upcoming year? And how do you see yourself advancing social change and racial justice through your position? Reier?
So VPR did this, Brave Little State did a question which was asking BIPOC Vermonters what they needed white people to do for them. And I participated in it, and maybe some of the panelists participated in it as well. But like the overwhelming thing that people said was just listen to us or believe us. And it was like overwhelming. That's what seemed like almost every person said. And that's kind of what we need to do to move forward. When we talk about things like equity, we sometimes think about it as just like a tag word or a buzzword, but what it really means is listening and believing. So a couple big things that I really think we need to be pushing Vermont lawmakers in doing is looking at the ways we promote community policing. And that includes something that I'm very passionate about and I've worked with Kiah with in the past, and that's the SRO, or the police in schools. Community policing today isn't the Andy Griffith Show. It is having a militarized presence in your community. And for Black people and Indigenous people and people of color in general, police aren't there to help us or to keep us safe or to make us feel secure. Every single Black parent, every single Black parent has had the talk with their kid, and it's not a fun thing. And it's a way in which Black parents have to teach their kids the ways in which they are not allowed to exist in our world. And when we have things like community policing, when we have things like police in schools, what that tells those children is your parents were wrong, that police officer's a friend, feel free to do what you want with them. And as we know from Tamir Rice, that's not the case. Black children do not get to behave like white children in this world. And it's vitally important that we address issues like that in terms of equity. For me and High Bailiff, the High Bailiff position isn't a lawmaking position. It's largely symbolic. And it's largely one that doesn't do a lot. I doubt I'll have to arrest the sheriff, which is one of its responsibilities. And I doubt very much I'll have to fill in for the sheriff. The governor will probably put someone in before I'd ever have to do that. But what the High Bailiff is a position that has a voice and has a position and is able to say things and make sure those things are heard. So like Kiah was talking about, it's the vital importance of having people, BIPOC residents in positions to be able to say their truth and talk about what needs to be spoken about in a way that's personal and important is really what we need to do. And so going forward, just in general, we really, really, really need to push, especially like Democrats, to the Progressive Party, I think, is doing a great job, but you could do it even more, is getting more voices at the table, more diversity at the table, because the more diversity we have at the table, even in a state like Vermont, the better our system is going to be. And I remember what happened to Kiah. I remember that, and I will never forget that, because I remember thinking Kiah was this hero and this amazing person. And I was like so proud of a state that had someone like Kiah sitting in the state house, and to watch what happened to her was heartbreaking on a general level, but on a personal level as well, because what that told me was that I do not have a place at the table. And until we answer for those actions, until we answer for those actions in general, we don't have an equitable society. And so that's what I really want to push forward, is listening to BIPOC residents and making sure that they have a voice at the table. Even if it isn't elected, if a city wants to put together a committee and hear those voices. Get those people at the table. They don't have to be elected necessarily, but they need to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reier. So next we're going to hear again from Ashley Laporte.
Thanks, Brian. So, of course, I think it's critical that we tackle the racism in the criminal justice system moving forward. I think it's critical that we tackle police reform. And I'm particularly focused on that in Burlington because I think we have a broken Burlington Police Department with a clear lack of leadership that's lasted far too long. I also hope that we can put some focus at the state level and in the city, though, on BIPOC advancement, and particularly on securing equal opportunity and economic advancement. I've had a career in marketing over the past 10 years. I have a lot of privilege from my education and from access to a great job out of college. But And what anyone who's in business will tell you is that being able to take risks is a surefire way to be successful in business, taking risks often. But what I have found in my personal experience is that I have taken fewer risks than many of my white counterparts. And that's because I don't have anything to fall back on. The Black people have been kept away from generational wealth systemically. And we do not have the same kind of access to capital that our white counterparts do. In 2018, there was $85 billion raised through venture capital funds in the US, but less than 1% of those $85 billion went to BIPOC women-owned businesses. I look at businesses like Cafe Mama Juana in Burlington. I look at Conscious Homestead. These are two BIPOC Women-X owned businesses that have really sound business plans, and they have more demand than they can keep up with. And all you have to do is have an empanada from Maria or sit in a meditation session with Candace, and you will understand that what they have in front of them is an incredible service to offer to our community. And in particular, they are on their own shoulders serving BIPOC communities first, because as BIPOC women, they know how important that is. And yet, they do not have access to the same capital as their white counterparts. This is due to things like generational wealth, right? Like the majority of startups in our very entrepreneurial culture as a nation, and in particular in Vermont, come from a first round of friends and family funding. And we know that if there is not money there, and then you turn to things like venture capital or other places to fund your businesses, they are not choosing BIPOC women. They are not choosing Black people. And so, with the passing of the racial justice resolution that was sponsored by Councillor Hightower, there were provisions made inside of that resolution to support economic advancement of BIPOC folks in our community. And, I have seen how symbolically these things can get passed. And then there is a lack, I think Kiah made this point, of momentum. People get tired and it becomes difficult for us to see this stuff go over the finish line. So, this next year, you can still find me protesting in front of the Burlington Police Department, and you can still find me calling for violent officers to be removed from our police department, because that must happen. But you can also find me on city council calls and calling up my representatives, putting the pressure on them to get the work done to advance BIPOC folks in our community, to put money in the pockets of the BIPOC-owned businesses that are really serving this community, and they are doing it barely scraping by because they're not getting the support that their white counterparts are. And, I think to the second question, which is how do I see, why is it important to run for justice of the peace and what do I want to do in that role? I know that talking only about representation sometimes misses the bigger picture, but I can tell you as a Black woman, as a Black young girl here, not seeing anybody who looked like me in positions of power, it was very hard to envision and imagine what was possible for me. Luckily, I was raised by a white woman who told me that anything was possible, and she tried to give me examples all over the place of what it could mean to achieve. But now, as I connect with folks like Noelle Ribby Williams, who was a part of that Montpelier High School group that raised the Black Lives Matter flag, as I engage with women like Kiah Morris, like I can feel the power of what it means to have people who look like me in positions of power. And now the justice of the peace is not the most powerful position, but in this position, we have the ability to marry people, to be a notary, to administer oaths, and perhaps most importantly, to be a part of our elections. And as we head into this general election with a president and an administration that is spreading misinformation around alternatives to in-person voting, that's calling on vigilantes to man polling stations to intimidate voters, it is calling back a time in which Black people in this country have been kept away from exercising their right to vote. And if all I can do is be a Black body in the room when any of those injustices could start to occur, I think that that's powerful. I am incredibly proud to be running for Justice of the Peace with lots of other BIPOC folks actually in Burlington, including my absolutely brilliant and powerhouse of a younger sister, Jessica Laporte. I really hope that we have more than one or two Black folks, one or two BIPOC folks as justices of the peace. I hope that we have the 5+ folks that are running. It is powerful when we think about having, and I think Reier made this point, people who look like us in the room, who are speaking up and calling truth to power, who refuse to let racism be shoved under the rug, and who are saying to the other BIPOC folks in the state, we are here, we are smart, we're powerful, and we're going to stand up for ourselves.
Thank you, Ashley. So next we're going to have Mark.
I figured I'd start a stopwatch too. So yeah, there is so much in front of us. And I think that as I look forward, I can't help but to look back and think about where we are and what brought us here. And I'm pretty sure that it's a result of a lot of the work that we've accomplished, that the scaffolding was in place, got to where we are. Think about that. So there's a lot of work that's gone into getting us to where we are, and there's a lot of effort that's being placed into more. And I think that, again, like I said previously, the lexicon has changed. What I'd like to see, what I'd love to see, is I'd like to see that connection. Now, I'm going to talk about the party for a minute, the Progressive Party. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see that connection of the cultivation of folks that are coming up in this enrichment, where this is kind of the boot camp, if you will. We're not just putting people in offices. What we're doing is we are cultivating leaders in racial justice. And it's not enough to have a platform. It's what we're discovering, what I've discovered is in the legislature, you could put all the Black people or people who are progressive or people who are Democratic in there, and you know what you're going to get? You're going to get exactly what their values reflect. And that's exactly what we've been getting. So I think as the party is concerned, what I'd love to see is I'd love to see in our future a cultivation that we have a solid legislative agenda. So when we get to the finish line, we're crossover, or when things start getting to the governor's office, we just don't have a party or members of the party just standing up and hijacking bills and saying, oh, we believe in this. You didn't believe in it when it started. You telling me that that's your values, but you weren't there to support it. It's kind of like the little red hen. So I think we need to be able to create that across the party, is that cultivation to create that vision within the party. Because if you look at every single thing that has gone through, mostly everything that's gone through this legislature that has really spoken to people of color at a fundamental level. I'm talking about this systemic stuff that we've been talking about. That all came from Black people. Didn't no legislators walk in there and say, hey, this is a good idea? It came from us. Okay. Here's the other thing is I'd like to see more work, that we're doing more work in spending time, not just on self, but on us, because whatever that apparatus is that's doing the work, quite often what I'm seeing is we spend a lot of time just going off to do the work, and we just forget about the fact that, let's fix this right here. Let's fix this right here. And I think that that's just so incredibly important, because as messy as it is really sloppy when you go off and you broke and you're trying to get something done and you don't even got your own house straight. So I'll conclude with just saying that the truth about the future that I'm willing to say, that I think is important for most of us to say is that we don't know. I don't know what the future has for us. I don't know exactly where it's taken us or exactly where I believe it should go. And I feel comfortable with that. And previously, I got you, Brian. Previously, I didn't, but now I'm better off at saying that, but I'm willing to take the ride. I'm willing to follow wherever this is taking us. And I'm willing to be assertive enough and instinctive enough to try to make those calls along the way and try to figure out how to guide this thing as it takes us. Because one thing I found out through experience is generally speaking, I've never ended where I thought I was going. So I just want to conclude with that and say thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Progressive Party. Thank you, panel. You guys are amazing. And I'm looking forward to doing this work with you and moving forward.
Thank you, Mark. So next, we're going to hear from Taylor.
Oh, I am ready to continue to be in this work with you, Mark. So thank you for those words. And thank you, all of you, for speaking your truth to power and to the people here tonight. I think what is resounding in all of these remarks is literally having a voice at the table, and not only having a voice, but being heard. And so I'm going to take this just right back to Winooski and focusing on the fact that we are looking to change our charter here and making sure that all residents of Winooski are able to have a say in their government and the way that their money is being used and who is representing them within this city and within these systems of power. And that is such a pushback in and of itself. And giving someone a voice. We've learned this throughout time of folks being suppressed and not being able to use their voice. And we use this backwards knowledge of saying, well, I have my citizenship and that grants me this opportunity and you should be able to fight for your citizenship. And yet who fought for their citizenship? It's not white folks. It's not the people who have been in power here and have benefited from these systems. And yet they're the same folks who talk about having to fight for this right and how difficult it was. And yet there was no difficulties in gaining rights as a white person. They were granted to you upon birth. And yet people of color, and specifically Black and Indigenous people of color, had to fight for every single right that we have here in the United States. And so to argue that people who are residents here in Winooski would not want to have a voice in their own government is absolutely appalling and ridiculous. And on top of that, I'm going to go back to this piece, this circle metaphor of these bills being up on the wall, because once it passes here, because I am confident that the people of Winooski see the power that is in giving everyone a voice here. Once it passes here, it will go to the legislature where it needs to be voted on there. And we've already seen this vote occur in Montpelier, and yet that charter change is still not passed. So though the people of Montpelier have agreed and said that all residents living here in this city should have a voice, it is still not passed because the legislature has not done that work. And that's what we need to do. We need to take a look at what has not been done and continue it. We need to think about those who are most impacted in our state when we are making these bills, and stop making these band-aid approaches to, again, what we call equity or what we call justice, because it is exactly that. It's putting a band-aid on a very deep wound that is not being healed. And we need to take the time to actually heal those wounds. So it's a lot of work, y'all. It's going to be hard work, but it needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. And we need to be carving pathways for Black and Indigenous people of color to be in higher positions of power here in the state of Vermont, because that change is not going to happen without that.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Taylor. And, you know, we're really going to miss having Deanna Gonzalez from Winooski in the house, but it's really exciting that you have risen up to replace her in that seat. And I really look forward to working with you in that building and on Zoom, since that's what we deal with right now. So speaking of that building and of seats, last but not least, we're going to hear from Kiah Morris, who I miss immensely in that building. And we miss everything that you brought to that building in so many ways. So Kiah, will you sort of have the last word on the question here? Thank you.
Thank you. Brian, why are you gonna say all that, make me emotional, mess up my makeup? What are you doing? What are you doing? Thank you, everyone. This is a journey, and I'm grateful for this conversation. So one of the things that I feel fortunate to be able to do, and it's something that I had said long going into this process, even though I am not in that seat, I was in this fight before I was in that seat, and I'm in that fight today, even though I'm not in that seat, right? And so part of that fight is about the work that I'm doing with rights and democracy. And I'm so proud to be able to work closely with the Progressive Party and with folks who are interested in pushing a progressive agenda to make our collective liberation a reality, right? So what we are dealing with right now, as I do this work, I'm here to try to help change the fact that we do not have representation that is diverse in any of our bodies of government in this state. We do not. And what we have here today is a fantastic array of folks who have heard the call and are stepping up. But there's more that we need to do to support people other than to make it transactional, which is typically how it works. We need that Black femme voice to be the one to come fix our problems. We need that person from the LGBTQIA community to take care of that little piece over there. We need intersectional identities that are going to be in those spaces and places to ensure that not just their voice, but the voices of all the people that they are carrying and the histories and legacies of their ancestors are being brought fully to bear. I want to lift up and honor a good friend of mine who's across the border over in Ontario. His name is Sol Mamakwa, and he is the first full First Nations representative in the Ontario legislature. And one of the things he talks about is how lonely it is. So he has to represent the Indigenous community for the entire freaking region of Ontario. And it is exhausting to have to listen to God Save the Queen every single day. It is exhausting to constantly see what's happening to the different tribal communities, the high levels of suicide that are happening there, the poverty rates, the way that COVID is striking them, and having to be that solo voice. And so even though he has his own version of Progressive Party and the New Democratic Party up there, it's still not enough. It's not enough. He needs more folks. And so that's what I'm here to do. That's what I am working on right now. But I want to change it from being transactional of saying, please go ahead, bootstrap your way up and get in there, because there are systems and there are initiatives, there are movements within white supremacy culture and within direct white supremacy where white supremacists are trying to push out our folks from these seats of power. I'm having conversations and counseling representatives, elected officials across the state who are going, is this worth it? And it's not just about the threats to their lives. It's not just about the disruption to their economic mobility because of the ridiculously low amount to no amount of compensation that they're receiving for this incredibly difficult work that they're doing. These goals of these groups are to try to push our folks out, and it's working. So we have to change this because we're not here to be martyrs. We're not here to step up and to take slings and arrows and to get hit in the face and to be told that we are less, to have our spirits attacked. We are not here for that. Okay? That's not what we're doing. And that is not what we are called to do. So what are the other things that are keeping folks from not only stepping up, but for staying in? How are we supporting our folks financially? What does it mean for their family life when we're thinking about their literal safety? Because they're not just going to come after our candidates, they're going to come after our candidates' families and their mamas and their brothers and their sisters. How do we ensure that the folks we are asking to step up that are already recognizing that it is not equal when we step into that playing field to create that equality? And so that's what we're trying to do within Rights and Democracy in this movement politics work across both states, both Vermont and New Hampshire. And I want to also remind folks that those other seats of power, there are also many places that are made through appointments. So we have people who are in power who say, you get to be on that commission, or we're going to ask you to play on this task force. And many of those have application processes that are onerous, ableist, discriminatory, unnecessary. These are also the spaces and places we need to be in. And so I am deeply committed to working vigilantly to try to help make that possible. If you need language translation to understand the bills that are coming across your desk, we're going to make sure you get that. If you need ADA accommodations so that you can even literally get in the building, we're going to fight for you to make sure you get what you need. If you are concerned about your ability to feed your family because the little penance that they give for your work is not enough for you to be able to do that and maintain a job, we need to find a better way. And we absolutely have to get campaign finance reform to get money out of politics. But I am so proud to be with these folks today. And I'm so proud with everybody that's stepping up to run. And I need you. We need all of you. We need all of you. Let's keep this conversation going and let's continue to make this work be meaningful for each of us so that it's our voices that are the ones that are speaking the loudest and the ones that are being honored, not just heard, but honored in those spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge each of our panelists one last time. We have Reier Erickson, who's running for High Bailiff in Franklin County. And if I say something wrong, you can correct me. We have Ashley Laporte, who's running as a Justice of the Peace in Burlington, Vermont. We have Mark Hughes, who's running as a Justice of the Peace in Burlington, Vermont. We have Taylor Small, who's running for state representative for Winooski and the River Sliver of Burlington. And we have Kiah Morris, former state representative from Bennington and current movement politics director at Rights and Democracy. So thank you to our guests tonight for making the time. Thank you to everyone who watched and who tuned in. I just have a few final announcements. Before we leave, I just want to read a quote from the Progressive Party platform that I read at the beginning as a reminder to everyone moving forward. That this is the quote, as progressives, we understand that every issue intersects, yet at the core is the underlying question of how we treat each other. We therefore and foremost believe in eliminating institutional racism against people of color currently in Vermont and all future Vermonters. And we will proactively work to eliminate institutionalized racism in our workforce, government, and law enforcement, and personal racial bias in ourselves. So just let's sit on that, moving forward as progressives. And then just a few final announcements. We would like to remind folks that you should fill out and return your ballots ASAP. Everyone needs to vote. Please vote, 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 vote. I don't believe that our vote is our voice is our voice, but your vote is one way of expressing yourself and a very powerful way of affecting the outcome of decisions in our society. So please vote, fill out your ballots, return your ballots ASAP, make your plan to get to the polls if you're going to go in person and show up. The second piece, please consider making a donation to the Progressive Party. The Progressive Party does not accept any corporate contributions, which puts the Progressive Party at a disadvantage to the other political parties. So please consider giving any amount. No amount is too small. We win because everyone gives what they can. So thank you. And the last piece is please tune in to our next 3 panels. The next 3 Thursdays at 8 p.m. leading up to the election, we will have panels Facebook Live, and they're recorded and they'll be available for people to watch afterwards. Next Thursday, October 15th, the topic will be climate justice. On October 22nd, the topic will be economic justice. And on October 29th, the topic will be rural issues. And each panel will feature a different spread of candidates running as progressives in the upcoming election, as well as other special surprise guests. So we hope to see you at our next few panel discussions. We hope to see you on Election Day and beyond. Thank you, everybody out there, for joining us tonight. And may you have a peaceful evening. And we love you all. Thank you.